James Wellington arrived at Buckingham Palace like a force of nature, his usual calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled panic. He had left his film meetings the moment he received Mrs. Patterson's frantic phone call, and, during the taxi ride across London, he had watched his son's mistakes spread across social media in real time. By the time he reached the palace gates, the story was trending worldwide. "Where is my son?" he demanded at the security checkpoint, his famous voice carrying the same intensity he brought to action movie roles. The guards recognized him immediately, but protocol was protocol. "Mr. Wellington, we'll need to verify your identity and escort you through proper channels," the lead officer explained, trying to maintain professionalism while dealing with one of the world's biggest movie stars. Inside the security office, Marcus heard his father's voice echoing down the corridor and felt a mixture of relief and terror. James Wellington was known for being patient with his son, but this was unlike any trouble Marcus had ever been in before. The boy sat straighter in his chair, trying to prepare himself for what was coming. Inspector Collins had been on the phone almost continuously, fielding calls from palace communications staff, her superiors, and increasingly persistent media outlets. The story had evolved beyond a simple incident report into a full-scale public relations crisis. International entertainment news shows were already preparing segments about Hollywood privilege and disrespectful American tourists. "The palace wants to handle this diplomatically," Inspector Collins explained to Private Hayes while they waited for James Wellington to be escorted to them. "They're concerned about the relationship with American film industry partnerships, but they also can't be seen as giving special treatment to celebrities." Hayes nodded, though he was still processing the surreal nature of the morning. 6 hours ago, his biggest concern had been maintaining proper posture during the ceremony. Now he was at the center of an international incident involving one of Hollywood's biggest stars. When James Wellington finally entered the office, the room seemed to shrink around his presence. Even in casual clothes, rushing across London in panic, he carried himself with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. His eyes immediately found Marcus, who looked smaller than ever in the large security chair. "Are you hurt?" James asked his son, his voice softer than expected. Marcus shook his head. "No, Dad. I'm okay. But I did something really stupid." James knelt beside his son's chair, temporarily ignoring the officials around them. "Tell me exactly what happened, and don't leave anything out." Marcus explained his actions honestly, from the initial curiosity about the guards to the moment he grabbed the hat. As he spoke, James' expression shifted from concern to disappointment to something approaching understanding. He recognized the impulsive curiosity that had driven his son's actions, the same trait that had made Marcus an adventurous and engaging child, but had now gotten him into serious trouble. "Inspector Collins," James said, standing and extending his hand. "I'm James Wellington. I understand my son has caused a significant problem. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate you coming so quickly. We're dealing with a complex situation here." She gestured toward her phone, which was buzzing constantly with new notifications. "The incident has gained substantial media attention." James pulled out his own phone, showing them the trending hashtags. #Hackgate, #CelebrityBrat, #BuckinghamPrank. The video had been viewed millions of times across different platforms, with reaction videos and commentary already being posted by influencers and news commentators. "How bad is this legally?" James asked directly. Inspector Collins exchanged glances with Private Hayes before answering. "Technically, removal of crown property without permission is theft. However, given your son's age and the circumstances, prosecution would be unusual. The bigger issue is the public nature of the incident and the diplomatic implications." As if on cue, a palace communications officer arrived with updates from the media monitoring team. The story was now being covered by major news outlets in 12 countries. Late-night comedy shows were already preparing segments. Several government officials had been asked for comment on American celebrity privilege and respect for British institutions. "There are some positive developments," the communications officer reported. Several veterans groups have posted supportive messages about Private Hayes' professionalism under pressure. And there's a growing social media counter-narrative about children making mistakes and learning from them. Private Hayes spoke up unexpectedly. "Mr. Wellington, if I may say something?" James nodded, his attention focused entirely on the young soldier. "Your son made a mistake, but he's been genuinely sorry about it from the moment he realized what he'd done. I was angry at first, but now I think this might be an opportunity rather than just a problem." "What do you mean?" James asked. Hayes looked at Marcus, who was listening intently. "People are watching this story around the world. Most of them will never meet a member of the Queen's Guard or visit Buckingham Palace. But they're seeing how we handle a difficult situation with dignity and professionalism. They're also seeing how a family deals with accountability." Inspector Collins caught on to Hayes' direction. "A public apology could turn this narrative around completely. Show responsibility, respect for British institutions, and genuine remorse." James considered this carefully. In his career, he had navigated numerous public relations challenges, but never one involving his son. Every instinct told him to protect Marcus from further public attention, but he also knew that trying to hide would only make things worse. "Marcus," James said, turning back to his son, "how would you feel about apologizing publicly to Private Hayes and explaining that you've learned from this mistake?" Marcus thought about it seriously. "Would it help him? I don't want him to get in trouble because of what I did." "Actually, it would help all of us," Hayes said. "But only if you really mean it." "I do mean it," Marcus replied firmly. "I feel terrible about what happened." Within 2 hours, palace staff had arranged a brief press conference in one of the smaller royal courtyards. The setting was formal but not intimidating, with James and Marcus standing beside Inspector Collins and Private Hayes, who had returned to his full-dress uniform. Marcus had practiced his statement during the preparation time, but when the moment came, he spoke from the heart rather than from the script. "My name is Marcus Wellington, and this morning I made a serious mistake," he began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I took Private Hayes' hat without permission because I was curious, but I didn't think about how disrespectful that was to him and to the Queen's Guard." The assembled reporters listened carefully, many of them surprised by his composure and genuine tone. "I've learned that the guards work very hard and take their duties seriously. They deserve respect, not to be treated like tourist attractions. I'm sorry to Private Hayes, to the Queen's Guard, and to everyone who was upset by what I did." Private Hayes stepped forward slightly. "I accept your apology, Marcus. I think everyone can understand curiosity, and I respect that you're taking responsibility for your actions." The questions from reporters were gentler than expected, focusing more on the lesson learned than on punishment or blame. James fielded most of them, emphasizing his son's character and their family's respect for British institutions. The press conference lasted only 20 minutes, but it fundamentally changed the story's trajectory. Instead of "Celebrity Brat Causes Chaos," headlines began reading, "Hollywood Kid's Heartfelt Apology Wins Hearts," and "Young Wellington Shows Class in Palace Incident." Social media sentiment shifted dramatically. Videos of Marcus' sincere apology were shared just as widely as the original incident footage, but with overwhelmingly positive responses. Veterans, parents, and even royal protocol experts praised both the boy's honesty and Private Hayes' gracious handling of the situation. 3 months later, Marcus received an unexpected invitation to return to London for a private tour of the Tower of London with the Yeoman Warders. The invitation came with a note from Private Hayes, who had been promoted and commended for his professional handling of the incident. "Sometimes mistakes become opportunities," the note read. "You turned a difficult moment into a lesson about accountability and respect. That's something to be proud of." Marcus kept the note in his bedroom back in California, where it served as a reminder that taking responsibility for mistakes, no matter how embarrassing, was always the right choice. The bearskin hat incident became a family story about learning and growth rather than shame. James Wellington later said in interviews that watching his son handle the consequences of his actions with honesty and grace was one of his proudest parenting moments. "He showed more real courage in that press conference than I've ever had to display in any movie role." The viral video still circulated occasionally on social media anniversaries of the event, but it was usually shared alongside Marcus' apology and the positive outcome. What could have been a family's worst public relations nightmare became instead a story about second chances, personal growth, and the power of genuine accountability. Private Hayes continued his distinguished military career and occasionally spoke to youth groups about handling pressure and treating others with dignity, regardless of the circumstances. He never forgot the morning when a curious 12-year-old taught him that sometimes the most important battles are won not with anger, but with understanding and grace. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the velvet ropes, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood Marcus Wellington, a 12-year-old boy whose face would be recognized by millions around the world, though most people here had no idea who he was. His father, James Wellington, was one of Hollywood's biggest action stars, known for playing fearless heroes who saved the world before breakfast. But today, Marcus was just another curious kid watching the guards in their iconic red tunics and towering bearskin hats. Marcus had begged his father to bring him to London during their European vacation. While James attended meetings with British film producers, Marcus spent his days exploring the city with his nanny, Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 60s who had worked for the Wellington family for years. She was patient with Marcus's endless energy and curiosity, though sometimes she wondered if she was getting too old to keep up with such an adventurous boy. The crowd pressed closer as the ceremony began. The guards stood perfectly still, their faces expressionless beneath their massive black hats. Marcus watched in fascination as tourists tried desperately to make the guards react, taking selfies and making funny faces, but the soldiers remained as motionless as statues. Their discipline impressed him, reminding him of the military consultants who worked on his father's movies. "How do they stay so still?" Marcus whispered to Mrs. Patterson, who was busy taking photos with her phone. "Years of training, dear," she replied absently, focused on getting the perfect shot for Marcus's mother back in California. "They're real soldiers, not actors like your father." Marcus studied the nearest guard more closely. The man was young, probably in his 20s, with a strong jaw and serious eyes that stared straight ahead. His rifle was positioned perfectly, his posture flawless. But there was something about his stillness that made Marcus want to test it, the same impulse that made him poke at sleeping dogs or see how long he could hold his breath underwater. The bearskin hat sat high on the guard's head, looking almost too big for him. Marcus wondered how heavy it was, how hot it must be inside, whether the guard's neck hurt from holding it steady. He had heard these hats were made from real bear fur and cost thousands of dollars each. The thought of something so expensive and important sitting right there, just a few feet away, made his fingers twitch with mischief. Mrs. Patterson moved further down the rope line, trying to get a better angle for her photos. She assumed Marcus was following her, but he had become transfixed by the guard's absolute stillness. A group of teenage girls tried to get the soldier's attention by waving and giggling, but he didn't even blink. An older man deliberately dropped his hat near the guard's feet, hoping to see some reaction, but the soldier remained frozen. That's when Marcus got his idea. He looked around and noticed that Mrs. Patterson was now 20 feet away, completely absorbed in photographing the ceremony. Other tourists were equally distracted, pointing cameras in every direction. Security personnel were focused on the larger crowd dynamics, not watching individual children. For just a moment, Marcus found himself in a bubble of inattention. The guard stood less than 3 feet. Security personnel surrounded Marcus within seconds, their movements swift and professional. The lead officer, a stern woman named Inspector Sarah Collins, had been managing crowd control at royal events for over 15 years. She had seen everything from marriage proposals to protest attempts, but never a celebrity's child stealing a guard's hat in front of hundreds of witnesses. "Son, I need you to very carefully hand me that hat," Inspector Collins said, her voice calm but firm. She could see the boy was terrified, practically shaking as he clutched the bearskin hat against his chest. Marcus looked up at her with wide eyes, then back at the guard whose face was still flushed with anger and embarrassment. The weight of the hat seemed to double with each passing second. Around them, the crowd had swelled as words spread through the tourist groups. Camera phones were held high, recording every moment of his humiliation. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible above the murmur of onlookers. Mrs. Patterson finally reached him, pushing past 2 security officers. "Marcus, dear God, What were you thinking? She was breathing heavily, her usually perfect gray hair disheveled from running through the crowd. The guard, whose name was Private William Hayes, stood at attention, but his eyes remained fixed on Marcus. This was his first year on ceremonial duty, and he had never imagined anything like this happening. His sergeant had drilled into all the guards that their uniforms and equipment were sacred symbols of the crown. Having a piece of his kit stolen by a child in front of tourists felt like a personal failure. "Ma'am, we need to sort this situation out properly," Inspector Collins told Mrs. Patterson while keeping her attention on Marcus. "There are protocols that must be followed when crown property is interfered with." Mrs. Patterson's face went pale. Crown property? But he's just a child. He didn't understand. "The hat belongs to the Queen's Guard, ma'am. It's government property, and removing it without permission is technically theft, regardless of the person's age." Marcus heard the word theft and felt his stomach drop. His father had always taught him to take responsibility for his actions, but this was so much bigger than anything he had ever done wrong before. He could already imagine the headlines, the embarrassment his family would face, the way this would follow him for the rest of his life. "I want to give it back," Marcus said louder, stepping toward Private Hayes. "I'm really sorry. I just wanted to see what it felt like." Private Hayes looked down at the boy, his anger beginning to mix with confusion. Marcus wasn't some troublemaker or political protester. He was clearly a scared kid who had made a terrible mistake. But Hayes also knew that dozens of people were filming this interaction, and how he handled it would reflect on the entire regiment. "You cannot just hand it back like borrowing a toy," Hayes said stiffly. "This is a serious breach of protocol." Inspector Collins spoke into her radio, calling for additional support and notifying her superiors about the celebrity connection. Within minutes, the situation had escalated beyond a simple crowd control issue. Palace communications staff would need to be involved, and quite possibly diplomatic personnel, given James Wellington's international profile. Meanwhile, the first social media posts were already going live. A teenager named Emma Richardson had been filming the ceremony when Marcus made his move, and her video captured everything from the moment he ducked under the rope to the guard's shocked reaction. She posted it to TikTok with the caption, "Celebrity Kid Steals Guard's Hat at Buckingham Palace. Chaos." The video began spreading immediately. Emma's friends shared it. Then, their friends shared it. And within 20 minutes it had been viewed 50,000 times. News outlets monitoring social media for trending content picked it up almost instantly. Entertainment reporters who specialized in celebrity children recognized Marcus from previous photos and began making phone calls. Back at the palace, Marcus was being escorted to a private security office while Mrs. Patterson frantically tried to reach James Wellington. The film meetings he was attending were supposed to last all morning, and his phone was turned off as requested by the production company. "Mr. Wellington is in meetings until noon," his assistant informed Mrs. Patterson when she finally got through. "I can try to get a message to him, but they're very strict about interruptions." Mrs. Patterson explained the situation as best she could, but even to her own ears it sounded unbelievable. "Yes, Marcus took a guard's hat. No, I don't know why. Yes, there are cameras involved. Lots of cameras." In the security office, Marcus sat in a chair that felt too big for him while Inspector Collins filled out paperwork. The bearskin hat sat on her desk like evidence in a crime scene, looking somehow smaller and more ordinary now that it wasn't on a guard's head. "Can you tell me exactly why you took the hat?" Inspector Collins asked, her tone more gentle now that they were away from the crowd. Marcus thought carefully before answering. "The guard was so still, like a statue. I wondered if anything could make him move. I didn't think about it being stealing. I just wanted to see what would happen." "And what did you think would happen?" "I don't know. Maybe he would smile or say something. I didn't think he would get so angry." Marcus paused, then looked up at her with genuine confusion. "Are you going to arrest me?" Inspector Collins studied the boy's face. He clearly understood he had made a mistake, but he also seemed genuinely surprised by the severity of everyone's reactions. She had seen real troublemakers in her years of security work, and Marcus didn't fit the profile. He was impulsive and thoughtless, but not malicious. "That depends on several factors," she said honestly. "The hat is valuable government property. You disrupted an official ceremony. And, unfortunately, the whole thing was recorded by dozens of people. As if summoned by her words, Inspector Collins' radio crackled with updates from the scene. The crowd outside had tripled in size as word spread through London's tourist areas. News vans were beginning to arrive, and reporters were interviewing anyone who claimed to have witnessed the incident. Private Hayes knocked on the office door and entered when Collins called for him to come in. He had been relieved of duty temporarily while the incident was investigated, and he looked deeply uncomfortable still being out of uniform formation. "How are you feeling about all this, Private Hayes?" Inspector Collins asked. Hayes glanced at Marcus, then back at her. "It's been a difficult morning, ma'am, but I've been thinking about it," and he paused, choosing his words carefully. The boy clearly didn't mean any real harm. He was just being curious. Marcus looked up hopefully. "You're not angry anymore?" "I'm still not happy about what happened," Hayes said seriously. "But I can see you're sorry about it. The thing is, it's not just about you and me anymore. This has become much bigger than that." Inspector Collins nodded grimly. "The communications department is already getting calls from news outlets. This story is spreading online faster than we can track it." She showed them her phone, where the TikTok video had already been viewed over 500,000 times and was trending on Twitter. The headlines were writing themselves. "Celebrity brat attacks Royal Guard. Hollywood kid's palace prank goes viral. Wellington's son causes international incident." "Oh no," Marcus whispered, seeing the comments rolling in beneath the video. Many were calling him spoiled and entitled, demanding he be arrested. Others were defending him as just a curious kid. The divide was sharp and getting sharper by the minute. Mrs. Patterson's phone buzzed with a text message from James Wellington's assistant. "Meetings canceled. He's on his way. Arriving in 30 minutes. Lawyers being contacted." The mention of lawyers made Inspector Collins straighten up. This was quickly moving beyond a simple disciplinary matter into something that would require careful handling by people far above her pay grade. She had hoped to resolve everything quietly, but that option was disappearing as the media attention intensified. Outside the office, they could hear increased activity as palace staff dealt with the growing crowd and media presence. What had started as a moment of childhood curiosity had exploded into an international news story, and Marcus Wellington sat in the middle of it, still not fully understanding how picking up a hat could have such enormous consequences. Private Hayes looked at the boy with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "You know, when I was your age, I once took a parking cone from a construction site because I thought it would make a good football goal. My mom made me return it and apologized to every worker on the crew." Marcus managed a small smile. "Did it work? As a goal?" "Terrible. Too narrow, and cars kept hitting it." Hayes paused. "But I learned something important about taking things that don't belong to me." "I'm learning that too," Marcus said quietly. "I think I'm going to be learning it for a long time." Inspector Collins watched the interaction with growing concern. The boy clearly understood his mistake and was genuinely remorseful, but the wheels of bureaucracy and media attention were already turning too fast to be stopped by simple apologies. This incident was about to become much larger than anyone in that room could control, and a 12-year-old child was at the center of it all, that T from the rope barrier. Marcus was tall for his age, athletic from years of swimming and tennis lessons. His father had taught him to be quick and confident in everything he did. "If you're going to do something, do it with purpose," James Wellington always said. "Hesitation is what gets people in trouble." Marcus ducked under the rope with the fluid motion of a boy who had spent years dodging paparazzi and slipping away from bodyguards. In Hollywood, he had learned to move fast and think faster. The distance to the guard was only a few steps. The bearskin hat was right there, close enough to touch. He reached up on his tiptoes, his fingers just barely able to grasp the bottom edge of the massive hat. For a split second, he thought about pulling his hand back, about returning to Mrs. Patterson's side like a good boy. But the thrill was too much. With a quick motion, he lifted the hat from the guard's head and took several steps backward, holding his prize triumphantly. The guard's reaction was immediate and terrifying. The moment the hat left his head, the soldier's training kicked in. His head snapped toward Marcus, his eyes blazing with shock and fury. For years, he had been taught that his uniform and equipment were sacred, that protecting them was a matter of life and death. No one, absolutely no one, was allowed to touch a Queen's Guard without permission. "Stop right there," the guard shouted, his voice cutting through the morning air like a knife. The crowd of tourists, who had been chattering and laughing just seconds before, fell into stunned silence. Marcus froze, the heavy bearskin hat clutched against his chest. It was much heavier than he had expected, and, suddenly, he realized the magnitude of what he had done. This wasn't like taking a prop from one of his father's movie sets. This was real, and he was in real trouble. The guard stepped forward, breaking his rigid formation for the first time in hours. Other guards nearby began to turn their heads, though their training prevented them from abandoning their posts completely. Tourists started pointing and whispering, their cameras now focused on the unfolding drama instead of the ceremony. "Put that down immediately," the guard commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone trained to be obeyed without question. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. He looked desperately toward Mrs. Patterson, who had finally noticed the commotion and was pushing through the crowd toward him, her face pale with horror. But she was too far away to help, and security personnel were already moving in their direction. The hat felt impossibly heavy in his small arms. What had seemed like a harmless prank just moments before now felt like the worst mistake of his life. The guard's face was red with anger and embarrassment, and Marcus could see other soldiers trying to maintain their composure while clearly wanting to react to this unprecedented situation. "I'm sorry," Marcus stammered, but his voice was lost in the growing murmur of the crowd. That's when the first camera phone appeared, then another, and another. Within seconds, dozens of tourists were recording the scene, capturing every moment of Marcus's terrified face and the guard's furious reaction. Someone in the crowd gasped as they recognized the boy from entertainment magazines and red carpet photos. "Is that James Wellington's son?" A woman whispered loudly enough for others to hear. The whisper spread through the crowd like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone was recording, everyone was calling friends, everyone was witnessing what would soon become one of the most viral videos of the year. Marcus Wellington, son of Hollywood royalty, had just committed what appeared to be a serious breach of royal protocol, and it was all being captured in high definition. The guard advanced another step, his training warring with the unprecedented nature of the situation. He had been taught to protect the crown's dignity at all costs, but he was also facing a child who was clearly terrified and overwhelmed. Behind his anger, a part of him recognized that this was about to become much bigger than a simple prank. Mrs. Patterson finally broke through the crowd, her face a mixture of panic and mortification. "Marcus Wellington, you put that hat back this instant," she shouted, using his full name in the way that always meant serious trouble. But it was too late for quiet solutions. Security personnel were now jogging toward the scene, their radios crackling with urgent communications. The ceremony had officially been disrupted, protocols had been violated, and a 12-year-old boy stood at the center of an international incident that was already spreading across social media at the speed of light.